Hello, welcome everybody back to Workplace Conversations podcast. Gives me great pleasure to welcome to today's edition Melinda Smith. Her business is called Change with Mel. Hello, Mel. How are you?
Hi, Paul. Yeah, I'm good.
That's good.
Thanks for
We're
asking.
here. Yeah, we're going to talk about the subject of change
Awesome.
today. So I'm interested, perhaps first of all, to get a bit of an understanding as to how you talk to people about change, because there are people who have different perspectives on change. They're coming from change in different directions. How do you talk about change, and what's the scope of your work in that area?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because everybody's got a different view about what change is or what sits behind it. So it depends who I'm working with. So if I'm working with an individual, then it's really geared at the individual and determining if they need a change from doing something one way and changing to another. Often it's a case of they're either feeling stuck and they need something to give because they're not feeling satisfied, or they've been given some feedback through performance that they need to work on a certain area. So I will work with them on those spaces. So that's at an individual level. When it comes to organizations, then there's all sorts of change. It could be digital transformation where you're putting in a new system, either replacing an old one or moving completely from manual, so into digital space. It could be, I did recently an office move where they were working, they all had their own desks, and then they moved to open plan or activity-based working, where they had to share their desks and have lockers, and they had neighborhoods. So there was a big shift in the way that they approached coming into the office. So they're just some examples. There's lots of different types of change that, as a change practitioner, I would be working on.
Yeah. Any particular that you like the best?
Yeah, good question. I love digital transformations only because I get to really dive in and have a play and learn the new system myself. And because I love learning, and I self-confess do love change. So
Yep.
they're all good things because I feel myself expanding as I do them. Ways of working, I actually really enjoy as well. I recently worked on a diversity, equity, and inclusion program where I was actually project managing in a way, but also doing the change. It was a little bit of a hybrid role, bringing in and putting the foundations in for that program for them, and then handing over to them to run it. So that was fabulous. So to be honest, I've done all sorts, done mergers and acquisitions, structural changes. Yeah. But digital is probably a sweet spot, as is anything that is improving the culture of an organization.
Yeah, okay. Do you find there's any particular common ingredients that are most effective in regards to change? Maybe say from an organizational point of view. Are there things that stand out for you?
Are you talking about change models or?
No, to create the outcome. So are there things that you think that are most likely to lead to the desired change if you must do 1, 2, and 3?
Yeah, 100%. So I guess, that's like the secret sauce, isn't it, in a way?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's really, there's probably more than 3, but let me try and think about the top 3. So the first thing would be you need the top layer to be fully on board and supportive of the change.
Yep.
So it's like your coalition of the willing in a way.
Yes.
If you don't have that, and you don't have a good sponsor in play and a good steering committee who's supporting the change, you're probably going to struggle, is what I would say.
Yep.
So that's kind of over there. That sort of sits over there in your governance space. The big thing is leadership involvement. Now it's really interesting. I was doing some research just this week, actually. A report's come out from Accenture just this year, saying that while leaders are saying that they 100% expect there will be change this year for their teams and their organization, only 30% of them feel ready for that change. They don't feel like they've got the capability to lead their teams through change.
Right.
What I would say is that without your leaders fronting the change, you're going to you'll be in trouble, basically. So what you often see is that you've got a project timeline that starts over here with all of that pre-work and that pre-thinking done by you know, the secret squirrel group who doesn't tell anybody because they can't for good reason.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then they come along and then they start that process, and then somewhere in here they'll drop in a change manager to come and do a piece of it. But then the change manager will finish up, and in my view, generally a bit prematurely, generally soon after
Right.
go live.
Yep.
It's after go live that the rubber hits the road. That's when you're actually
Mm.
starting to do the new process.
Yep.
But it's what they do it from a budget point of view and a resourcing point of view, completely understand. So that your
Yep.
change capability in leading change, it
Mm.
has to be strong. And we have to
Yeah.
make it better than we have to have more than 30% of people feeling like they can lead change.
Yes.
So that's kind of my big kind of bugbear, or my big passion, is to say,
Mm.
yes, you can bring in a formal structured change manager to help you. But if
Mm-hmm.
you don't get the underlying foundations right of your change capability,
Mm-hmm.
and also the change resilience and change culture of your organization,
Yep.
you're going to struggle. And that whole, there's this catch cry, and McKinsey put it out years ago, about 70% of change programs fail.
Yep.
And there's a lot of contention within the change management profession about whether that's true or not.
Yep.
But the key reasons are people don't feel engaged, they don't feel involved, and they don't know how to lead it.
Yes. Yes.
Mm.
Yeah. The involvement one is interesting. I remember working for corporations probably 20 or so years ago now, where the change was the leaders they've gone away. They've put themselves in the boardroom,
Yeah.
and they'll come out and let us know once the full plan is ready.
Yeah.
So we were all literally sitting twiddling our thumbs, waiting for the plan to be imposed upon us.
Yes, yes, and that breeds all sorts of things, like there's psychological safety issues is a huge one.
Yeah.
You know, that anxiety that sits there because people don't know, are their jobs at risk?
Yeah.
Will they know how to do the new way? What training will they get? And
Mm.
and the other big one there is that sits there is this concept of resistance, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that it's seen as a bad thing, it's seen as negative, it's got
Mm.
negative connotations just as a word.
Yep.
However, what happens is if you haven't co-created your change with the people affected or impacted,
Mm-hmm.
then the people sitting over here doing the business requirements, the project team in their secret squirrel land, don't often know the realities of what's happening on the ground.
Yes.
And that's why those people will say, yeah, but have you thought about this? And if they can't address it, then it just creates that or unrest. So,
Yes.
so that co-creation and that involvement as
Mm-hmm.
early as possible. And obviously there are sensitive things. And if people are going to have jobs at risk, we have to be very
Mm.
sensitive to that.
Yep.
But not everything is like that. So it's
Yep.
just working out how do you involve them in a way that is smart, that
Mm.
gives them an assurance that you actually listen to them and respond
Mm.
to that as best you
Yeah.
can.
Yeah. Yeah. The idea of resistance, where we potentially get into a situation where we inadvertently perhaps label people as resistant,
Mm,
it is it's not well thought through, is it? Because it's likely to further entrench people
mm.
in that idea that I'm being discarded and therefore I'm not coming on board.
It's a really tricky one. I agree with you. It's a label, and it's a label that is sticking. It's a sticky label.
Mm. Mm.
But I guess one of my big catch cries is resistance is good. We need to flip the narrative on it. We need to say it's
Yep.
actually a good thing. We need to listen, like really genuinely say, what don't you like? What do you think we've missed? Let's have a talk about it. And there'll be some things you can address and some things you can't.
Mm.
People respect that more than you trying to spin your wheels on stuff or push them into a corner.
Yep.
So I have a good example of this. I had a group of senior managers that we were creating a streamlined notification system. This was in an IT space to send out notifications when a system went down.
Yep.
And they'd all worked doing their own thing in silos, and they'd been all pulled together under one umbrella through a restructure. So suddenly now we needed a consistent way of approaching our end users.
Mm.
They all thought they were super special. They were unique. Their user groups were all different, and we couldn't just have one message. And so they were perceived as being resistant, right?
Yep.
And they didn't want to change. They wanted to keep doing what they've always done. And we know
Yep.
that is a human tendency
Yeah.
generally.
Yep.
Anyway, I brought them all in together and we talked about it. I actually got them to send me all their examples and we went through them. It was quite tedious. We went through and had a look at them.
Yep.
And lo and behold, what they were saying was there was a lot of consistency.
Yeah.
So what we did is we pulled out the consistent bits. We created and I say we created a new template.
Yep.
And so they felt like they owned it and they got say, they got input, and they were fine with it.
Yes.
And I'm not saying it's super easy, and there are some
No.
challenging conversations, but you have co-creation is the way to go.
Yeah,
You know what I
absolutely.
mean?
Yeah, that's right. Everyone wants to have some degree of ownership over what their future is going to be, don't they?
Totally.
The more
That
you can,
sense of control. Yeah. If
yeah,
you feel like you've got no say or no control, then yeah, you can start to put your barriers up.
yeah. So it sounds like you help organizations work with this concept of change readiness. Is that right?
Yep.
So from from a cultural point of view, and that's very proactive kind of work. Do you get, how do you get organizations around that idea of preparing for change? Let's develop those capabilities that will be required in the future, where people might say, "Oh, well, we're not in a change situation at the moment, so why do we need to develop these capabilities?" I'm interested in what your experience is on that.
It is interesting. So in the world of change management, we often do what I call change readiness surveys.
Right.
But we generally do those closer to when we're ready to do the new. So we call it go live or launch. So when we're ready to put the new way of working in place, we'll do that close just to see if there's anything we've missed.
Yeah.
So there is that kind of, I'm just using it as a technical term from a change readiness survey. But honestly, what I would say is if I would always plot out and say, where are our key milestones? Where is our go live date? And then you reverse engineer and you go backwards. And I would say a good 6 months before, you need to start engaging your senior leaders, the people who are going to convey the messaging, because that needs to come from, to our earlier point, the leaders need to do that. They've got the relationships, good or bad or otherwise, but they have the relationships with the teams. The teams need to be hearing from them and that they're also on song.
Yep.
So I'd be engaging them really early on, as early as possible. And then as we've done a bit of pre-work with them, then we would start to engage. I would always engage change champions.
Yep.
So, and I would normally go out and ask for nominations or people to express an interest and always vet it through that change cohort who had engaged the change leadership cohort to make sure that they're the right people. And I always say, try and get your biggest resistors on board early on so we can hear what's going on and we can start to address those issues.
Yes. Okay.
And then on both cohorts, I would always have regular meetings in play and I'd have them in the diary and they might be short and sharp if there's nothing to say, but we'd have them and we'd do check-ins.
Yep.
So that's going right back. And the whole conversation with your senior leader cohort and your change champion group is to ask that question. How are you and how are your teams feeling about change? What are people saying?
Yep.
What feedback are you getting? And you'd also use them as your vehicle to give them key messages. So I'd generally prepare packs for them to share with their teams, give them key messages, scripts if they need it, depending on level capability, I suppose. And again, you do that so you've got consistency.
Yes.
And so this is what you need to be sharing with your teams. You need to put change as an agenda item in your team meetings. 5 minutes, do a check-in with your team. Ask how everybody's feeling out of 1 to 5 or 1 to 10 or whatever it is.
Yes.
So that starts right back there. So I think as a change manager coming in to do a big change, is that they're your conduit to getting in touch with the front line and the sense and the pulse of what's actually happening in the organization.
Yes. So what you articulated there was the true definition of strategy, wasn't it? There's got to be thought behind what should we do first, who should we speak to first, second, because this needs to be in place, so that we can flow through, because certain things done before other things might just not create the desired effect.
I think what I see often is that people wait too late.
Yeah. Okay.
You need, and I understand there's a cost imperative here as well. But I say you start as soon as you can. And even if you can't tell them the whole story, you can start. Generally, you need a proper strategy then, and you have a bit of a comms plan that sits behind what you can start feeding through
Yep.
in terms of your timing. And it has to align
Yep.
to things like what's the CEO saying, what other messages are coming out, and how do we align them and make sure that we're all moving in the same direction in the right pace.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. With change being one of the psychosocial risks, the mental health risks in organisations, that being formally noted as one of those. What's the work you do with that in mind, with that mental health risk lens? Can you give us a bit of an idea as to how you work with that in mind?
Yeah, that's a really, I think psychological safety, and we know that we know that change fatigue is real. We know that trust is a real problem. So it's that whole engage your team, engage them early, start those conversations, listen to the people, hear what they're saying and respond. And again, do it early. And only leaders should be doing that, because they should be supported by change practitioners like myself, potentially, or project teams or HR. But the leader needs to do it because the leader's got the relationship in play. So it's that early engagement piece to listen to what's going on and address concerns straight up. Unfortunately, I see a lot of spin, a lot of spin doctoring going on, or BS. And I just say, it's not worth it. It's just not. All that does is create mistrust. And once you've broken trust, as you know, it's very hard to reestablish. So better just to be upfront. If you don't know, just say you don't know. Don't try and make something up. Address the concern that's going on. I think also things like making sure. So that's a leadership, and that's one-on-one. That's team to ratio with their team leader. There's also things like you could be doing resilience training with your teams. You could do change resilience training with your teams. If you know that change is constant, then you could be offering that kind of training. But what does that actually mean? How do I, at an individual level, manage my own anxiety if that's what I'm feeling? And the thing is around change, right, is that we've all got triggers, and we don't know what they are necessarily because they sit beneath the surface. So helping people work out their coping strategies. The other one is, depending on what it is, if it's like when I've done significant restructures, there's always employee assistance programs that we would pull into the fold, as well as extra support. When I've done messaging on mergers and acquisitions, even if people aren't impacted, we generally make sure people are aware that they have access to those things, because we don't know. You can't always identify who is going to respond to a change situation, because we don't know what sits behind people.
Depending on the nature of the change, it actually represents, say, for instance, it involves structural change. It actually represents a really good opportunity for organisations to potentially put in solutions that can prevent and mitigate a range of psychosocial risks. So it can actually be work that sort of kills two birds with the one stone. We're going through the change process, but we're also enhancing our ability to be compliant and beyond in regards to psychosocial risk.
And I mean, I feel around the change, it's that resilience, and how do we cope when something is changing and we don't feel like we've got control, because that's where you start to hit the barriers, right? Is how do we support our people through that process? And that should, I mean, I would agree with you. It should almost be like standard offerings, as long as it's done in a way that actually adds value, and isn't just a tick the box. Let's just tick the box exercise.
No, that's right.
Something that actually deeply adds value at an individual level.
One of the things I saw a post recently where a particular person who was quite an advocate of a particular change model became very upset at the fact that people were saying that there were other change models.
I might have seen the same one or a similar one.
Right.
Yes. Yep.
So there's there's the Cotter model, and there's a range of other models that have been used, even for regards to and sorry, the name escapes me at the moment, but the one that was originally around grief and then was translated into the
Kubler-Ross.
Kubler-Ross, sorry, yes,
Yes.
that's right. So
Yes.
how do people come to you and say, what change model are you using? And how do you engage with change models?
Yeah, it's interesting actually. I've just been doing a bit of research on how many change, so my best friend ChatGPT, my AI
Yep.
assistant,
Yep.
as knows me really well now.
Yep.
I asked how many change models there were out there just recently.
Right.
There are squillions of them, and yet
Right.
there's Cotter's 8-step, there's the Lewin model, there's the ProSci model or ADCAR. There are so many. It's like, where do you actually start? I am ProSci trained. I mean, that's kind of
Yep.
my default. So the ADCAR model, if you like.
Yep.
And I say that there are so many models out there, and generally they are really designed for change practitioners.
Yep.
I think there is a little bit that could be done or should be done with leaders so they understand some of, because the concepts are great and the similarities amongst them all. But
Yep.
I say it's a mix and match.
Yep.
So you find the models that work. So Kubler-Ross is actually, and I know there's been a lot of, it's an evolving space, I was going to say that. So Kubler-Ross has been questioned recently about, when it came into play, it was used in a certain context.
Yep.
Does it actually apply? And I say sometimes it does. So when I've done restructures, I've used that, for example, just for people to, and to be honest, even if it's not 100%, it's people understand they're going to go through a series of emotions and it might not be linear, and you might, it's a bit like Tuckman's model of teams, same thing.
Yeah.
Not completely linear. You kind of default back and things can come in and trigger you to go back to a certain stage in any model or any process.
Yeah.
So it's a mix and match. It's picking out the bits that work for you as a practitioner, for you as a leader. Say, well, it means something to me, and I know that I can use this in a meaningful way in this situation. So, and Agile's great as well, but if you apply them rigidly, it's like anything. If you apply anything rigidly, it's like you're trying to shove it in to fit a circumstance. It doesn't.
Yes.
Things are much more fluid than that. Things shift and
Yes.
change. There's always unknowns. So you've got to continually adapt and change yourself as you go and pick and choose the bits that are going to work for a particular circumstance.
Yeah.
Does it doesn't really answer your question?
No, it does, exactly, because I think the key message is don't become wedded to one, but look at that there are some really good in probably most of them. There's some really good food for thought that can help you construct the change process that you want to put in place for client A or person B or whatever. It's some inspiration that helps you form what you think is best.
Yeah, because the application, like there's a model and then there's the application of the model. So there's an interpretation that comes into play. So depending on the type of change, the type of organization, the goals and objectives, you might use different elements from different ones. So that's probably, it's a bit like, I'm not very brand loyal in that way.
Yes.
But my principles do sit, having said that, my principles do sit, ADCAR sits pretty strongly as an undercurrent for me, because I think it's just simple, it's easy to use and help people understand as you work through the process. But it's an interesting one. It's a really great question. And it's like I say, it's one that I've been playing with myself more recently.
What are there any new emerging themes or trends in regards to change that you think will change the way that change practitioners go about their job in the next X period of time?
Yeah, good question. I think AI is huge, right? I did a little while back when I first started getting more active posting on LinkedIn. I asked the question that if we weren't called change managers, what would we call ourselves? And I thought what was super interesting there was a high degree of resistance to changing what we would call ourselves. And I
Yeah,
thought,
right.
that's quite
Yeah.
ironic, really.
Yes.
And the only reason I asked the question is because I was being asked by a potential client that they didn't want to use that word change,
Yes.
but there was historic baggage that came with it. What were some
Yes.
other options? So I was kind of
Yes.
asking the audience. So, but I
Mm.
was fascinated by that response and thought, I think, so what for me is emerging is that we as change practitioners need to be adaptable and ready to change. I
Yep.
think AI is the other big one. I was on a webinar earlier this week with Allegra Consulting, and somebody shared an article, and I've had a look at it now through ProSci. I did a survey to say how many change practitioners are actually using AI.
Mm.
It was only 30%.
Yep.
And I'm like, wow,
Yeah.
only 30%. Now,
Mm.
I'm not the most proficient at using AI myself, but I am using it for
Yes.
sure. And I am having a
Mm.
play and I am experimenting.
Yep.
I think that's because I think we all have to. And
Yes.
and I think it's a little bit, I don't mean to be insulting here, but I think it's a bit naive to not.
Mm.
That
Yep.
if we want to stay ahead of the game,
Yep.
that and we want to be relevant, then
Yep.
we need to know what's out there,
Yep.
know what we like and what we don't like and why.
Mm. Yep.
But the time savings that these tools can give us is
Yep.
phenomenal.
Yeah.
Uh,
And I think it's a matter of if people are thinking that the outputs aren't as accurate or aren't as useful as what they'd like, they fairly soon will be.
yeah.
And so there are people who are, practicing, getting their skills up, ready for that time. So if people are not doing that, they could very much find themselves very far left behind.
Mm. I always say it's like change, right? I mean, AI is a change
It's
to
yeah,
all of us, right?
yeah,
So you'll get the super early adopters, which
yeah,
that time is past.
yeah,
Then you get that next wave.
yeah,
And I would say that I'm probably sitting in that next wave, right? Where I'm
mm,
like, okay, let's start having a look. I wasn't one of the early adopters, but I'm sitting in the next rung.
yep,
And if only, so I'm in the 30%, say.
yep,
Uh, the next wave that comes in behind that is kind of the big one. And then you have the
yes,
laggards, right? And you'll have
yes,
the Luddites right at the end.
yeah, yeah,
It will
yep,
never come along, and that's fine. But I
yep,
think most people, in terms of change, it's kind of similar. You'll get, yeah, those early people who embrace it and try and get on with it and work it out because
mm-hmm,
they're hungry for it, they're curious, they like it, whatever. And then
mm,
the people who are comfortable doing what they do now, and and there will be lots of valid reasons why people just don't have the bandwidth to onboard it, but at
mm-hmm,
some point they're going to have to, and they'll
yep,
come in a slipstream of it. Yes,
mm,
they won't be as advanced as perhaps those of us who started a bit earlier, but it's a
mm,
bit like, I don't know, could you liken it to, it's like a baby learning to walk, right? They learn at different times, but ultimately they all learn to walk,
mm-hmm,
predominantly.
yep,
Um,
yep,
some my son started at, he was up and running by 11 months. And then there are
yes,
others that don't get up and running till 18 months. But
yep,
ultimately, as adults, they're both running now. So it's like, it
yep,
doesn't really matter.
yes, yes,
Just about how you want to position yourself in the market.
yeah, that's right. And the ability to be able to do more interesting slash strategic work by becoming proficient in it, I think is
Hmm.
that will scare some people,
Yeah.
and for others it will really excite some people.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because it is back to the whole change concept. They will resist
Mm,
it because they don't know it. It's brand new.
yep,
It's scary. It's
mm,
overwhelming. It's too much.
yep,
They're saturated with enough stuff and they can't onboard it. That's all the stuff that we
mm,
do within change every day.
yeah,
But
yep,
that's generally, it's almost like an 80-20 principle, like really focusing on your 80%, because spending too much time with the 20% who don't want to do it, it's kind
mhm,
of like they're going to have to at some point anyway.
yep,
And it's just a lot more energy to bring them along than focusing on your 80% who are going to basically pull the way forward into the change that you're looking for.
yeah, yeah.
Mm.
So what's your, can I say, what is your pitch, if you like, a broad term, to organizations in regards to why it's in your interest to embrace change?
Oh, because there is no organization that will not experience change in any given year. And that I think it's not even that change is accelerating. I mean, change is accelerating. It's change is like, it's not even, I was going to say, it's not the new normal. It is normal. Change is normal. That's the thing that, you know, that's one of the only things that we can put hand on heart say. We know that every year something is going to change, and it's probably going to be fairly significant change. Whether you're doing it from an internal point of view or whether it's you're being disrupted, it's going to happen. So denying change or not thinking about change as part of your organizational strategy is just, for me, that's a huge gap. I think you kind of miss, you're either not watching the news, you're not reading the lay of the land that it's coming, and the more we can do to prepare people and help people through that, the better off you're going to be, and the more equipped you're going to be, and the more success you're going to have in your change projects.
Yeah, fabulous. All right. Well, thank you, Mel, that was very insightful. The way you articulate your message, I think, is really clear. So, you know, from a change point of view, listening to you, I can imagine that when you're working with clients, they feel that you're able to really explain things clearly, which is one of the really key important parts of any change process. So, and your knowledge and passion for that also comes through. So, wish you all the best. Thank you very much for being on the show today, and hope that we can get you back on sometime in the future as well.
Lovely. Thanks for having me, Paul. It was a
Okay.
joy. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Mel.